Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest episode of Tales from Outer Space, taken from the subreddit HFY. The links to all the stories will be down below, and as always, I hope that you enjoy. And if you do, please consider subscribing. Story number 1, The First Human, written by shoguncdn. The story of humans on the Galactic Collective began in a rather shameful fashion. The first human was not a captain of a great ship making first contact in space, surrounded by gas giants and fields of stars. Nor was it an ambassador flanked by all levels of bureaucrats in a grand assembly with 2 long speeches. Rather, the first human to ever meet the Collective was plucked from Earth by members of the Pearl race, operating what is known as the human as a picking operation. As told by the lost survivor of the flare, they were told of the uncharted backward world in what was understood to be a dead part of space. The information came from the Thurun, half out of its mind from being in space by itself for far too long. Most sentients would have ignored such a rambling story by someone piloting a craft that looked as if it was barely flying atmosphere. Never mind space, but Captain Shell of the flare was desperate. She had made her living by gathering curios and collectibles for those with the credits and spent on otherwise useless things. Her father was a prude highborn, but such a life was not remotely attractive to his eldest daughter, who preferred the adventures that a nomadic life brought. But even with her father's connections, the business was cutthroat and the margins slim. So the prospect of a new world with undiscovered creatures that might be of interest to a well-heeled was too tempting to pass up. So, to profit on her mind, Captain Shell took her ship and pushed it far beyond what it was ever intended for. Upon arriving in the system, they made their way to an unremarkable third planet, and, with the power and supplies running dangerously low, they simply scooped up the first specimen they came across. There was no analysis of the planet or organisms living on it. They simply had no time, as by then their chance of reaching even the nearest collective outpost was extremely slim. By the standard laws, the Captain Shell did was not illegal. However, not all species in the collective would agree that it should be legal. Humans had not yet developed FTL, and the benchmark for a civilized sentient species. Humans, of course, still object to this type of classification, but to many of the collective, their view of the species without FTL is similar to how humans view the animals known as monkeys. As such, there is no law against taking a creature from places, even if some may object to the practice. Such species are viewed as primitives. To the credit of the crew of the flare, they managed to get the ship almost back to the outpost. Certainly it had gone further than anyone could have hoped for, but it was not enough, and the decision was made to try and land the ship on a rather than perish in space, as fuel rods in the ship began to lose their containment. As told by the Captain Shell, the ship did not land. It crashed violently into the ocean of Felon 6, a minor planet on the outlying system of the Grinnell race. As Captain Shell and her crew began to abandon the ship, she came across the human as it wailed and pounded on the holding enclosure. As you know, the Pearl are unable to swim. Their bulbous bodies and lack of lower appendages make it physically impossible for them, so water terrifies them more than anything. From the birth, Pearl were warned against the dangers of water, and it was likely because of that phobia that Captain Shell took pity on the human and opened up the enclosure. FTL or not, the thought of letting the creature drown was not something that she could bear to live with. As water began rushing through the ship, the captain padded her way down to the escape pod, and the human, panicked and fearful, followed her. When they reached the pod, the captain was surprised that the human had followed her all the way. She had anticipated that it would simply run away in fear. The pod was a standard 2-crew affair, but humans are quite a bit larger than the average Pearl. As the water rose up, the captain did her best to communicate to the human that they needed to get inside. Whether from misunderstanding or fear, the human stood frozen on the ship's deck, water putting around it. The captain felt that it could do no more, however, and turned to the pod alone. At this point, the story becomes unclear as the captain could only recall the cold, salty water enveloping her. It was then that she felt strong limbs grasping her body and bringing her to the surface. While human strength is well known now, this part of the story was first dismissed as an embellishment. The human not only swam a distance of some 300 to 400 meters to the shore, it did so while dragging along a full-grown pal. Captain Shell recalled spending the next few days alternating between violent bouts of panic from the near drowning and drifting off into unconsciousness. Her memories of the events were fragments, seeing the human dragging pieces of the ship from the water, disappearing at times into the forest near the shore and weeping forlornly into the darkness. When the captain recovered enough to make lucid assessment of her surroundings, she found herself under the canopy made of pieces of wreckage and debris from the ship. The human had not only dragged the pieces from the shore, but had managed to wedge them into the branches of the trees by itself. As the thought dawned on the captain, she related that she felt a different kind of fear. She had no idea that humans possessed that kind of physical strength, and the captain realized that even uninjured, she would be no match for a human should it decide to turn on her for adopting it from its planet. There was also the canisters that contained water and the remains of the fire. The remnants of the various fruits and plants were piled further away. The human had managed to address the needs for water, shelter, and food in short order. The captain's injuries consisted of several abrasions to her lower pads, as well as some internal injuries. Her exoskeleton showed some cracks which would take time to heal. While not fatal, her injuries rendered her unable to do much except sit up and slowly move around. Felon 6 also has a slightly higher than standard gravity, which made it even more difficult for the captain. For humans, though, the gravity was only about 70% of Earth's gravity, which, coupled with the human's physiology, made it easier for the human to perform its tasks. When the human came back to the makeshift camp that day, he was carrying a load of wood back and would have crushed it in any pile. Upon seeing the captain awake and alert, it dropped the wood and ran over excitedly, which caused the shell to recoil in fear. The captain tried to plead for her life, but communication was not possible. As it turns out, however, the human had no intention of harming the captain. Those first few days were frustrating for both parties. Without a common language, it took some time for the two to figure out a system of gestures and simple words to create the beginnings of an understanding. The human found out the captain's name was Shell, and the Captain Shell learned the human was a female, and her name was Chloe. The captain learned that she had been semi-conscious for some 4 days. In the days and weeks that passed, Chloe and the captain worked together. Chloe took responsibility for the food and water, while the captain searched through the parts Chloe could find to see if she could cobble together to put together a distress beacon. While the pods all contained one, they were not waterproof. As the time passed, the captain could venture further from the camp. She scanned the shore and the water for any sign of the survivors, but the rest of the crew had been perished in the crash. While the captain did her best to help with the camp, and the lion's share of work was taken up by Chloe. She climbed the trees that contained the fruits and brought back the wood and water. She would start the fires with a piece of scavenged glass. The captain made no effort to hide the fact that it was Chloe who kept them alive all the time through her effort of collecting what meager food and water the area provided. Still, even with her abilities, the rations were Spartan and life was not easy. The human would often offer Captain Shell the last of her supplies for the day during the most difficult times, but both suffered the effects of too little food and water. Other times, one or the other would get sick eating something that was not compatible with their biology, as they tried to find food based on trial and error. The evenings the two castaways would spend time trying to learn more about each other's species. The captain would draw stellar maps in the sand and try to show Chloe where her planet was in relation. Each tried to explain their family structure with simple drawings. The captain learned that Chloe had a mother, a father, and 2 brothers. It was evident that the familial bonds of humans were as strong as any other species. Some evenings the two would sing each other's songs of their homes. Although it was not known that the Pal and humans tend to find each other's music very unappealing, the captain relates that she found comfort in hearing the humans singing to the sky on those nights. Other nights, the captain would awake to find her fellow castaway sitting with her arms wrapped around her legs, staring off at the stars. The captain did not know how truly difficult it must have been for the human. Approximately 2 months after the crash, Captain Shell managed to craft a distress beacon from the transponder and some batteries found in the debris that had washed up on shore. It was also the time that Chloe began to take seriously ill. Her usual energy and vitality were gone. Her body was racked with pains and her flesh excreted drops of liquid as it desperately tried to cool itself down. The captain did what she could to help ease Chloe's suffering, but her own injury still hampered her. Not even a human's physical strength could ward off alien bacteria and viruses without proper care. When the Gurnall ship finally picked up the beacon and landed near the camp, the crew reported that they came across a Pearl captain and a creature of unknown designation. All attempts to convince the captain to board the Gurnall ship were rebuffed, sometimes violently as she refused to leave without a companion. The Gurnall captain would not understand why the Pearl would insist on bringing along a dead human, but he finally relented and had 3 of his crew bring the body on board and stored it in a refrigeration unit. Captain Pearl refused offers of accommodation and spent the entire trip guarding the entrance to the storage area, afraid that the Gurnall would vent the body. Upon arriving at the outpost, Captain Shell used her considerable resources, her father, to obtain transport to the nearest Pearl system. It was then that she dedicated the rest of her life to advocate for the humans' inclusion into the collective. They argued that their compassion, strength, and intelligence made them deserving candidates. Taking full advantage of the circumstances of her birth and her contacts, she harassed official after official and filled motion and petitions, often enlisting the aid of influential families and friends. Although it took many years, the envoy was finally dispatched to Earth to initiate the first contact. At that ceremony, Chloe's remains were also brought back, cryogenically preserved for all those years. It was Captain Shell who presented the body to the story of the Earth representatives. A massive search was undertaken to find the family of the human, and when they were found, the tears flowed freely upon seeing her form within the cryo unit. Captain Shell told the family what had happened and begged for their forgiveness, even as she braced herself for the hate and anger. But it never came. Instead, the family thanked the Captain Shell for bringing her home and asked all gathered officials and diplomats to honor their request to be left alone to mourn. Captain Shell had hoped to learn more of the life of the brave human, but even human forgiveness had its limits, and she never heard from the family again. As the collective of humanity began to share their knowledge, it was an exchange about human biology that took the greatest toll on the captain. The enormity of what she had done became almost too much to bear, and since that time, Captain Shell has retreated from public life. Her current whereabouts are only known to her family. So, that is the story of how humans joined the collective, where they now prosper, and no other species has ever done. And in the spot where the envoy landed on Earth, there was a statue provided a gift from the Pearl, the human who made it all possible. It shows a young girl sitting with her arms wrapped around her legs, staring up at the stars with a very simple inscription. Chloe Young, the first human, born June 3rd, 2024, died July 18th, 2035. End of story. And that, my friends, concludes this video. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, please consider supporting the author from the link down below. Otherwise, if you wish to support this channel, there are numerous ways to do so, like liking, subscribing, and possibly even becoming a patron. Otherwise, the easiest way would be to share. And until the next video, I hope that you all have a good one, and I'll see you then. Cheers.